Hi, everyone. This is Alex Thornsrow, and today I'm going to be doing a devotional on trusting in Jesus. Do you ever feel like you may not offer a lot for the kingdom of God? You're asking yourself, I'm just one person. What could God use me to do? We far too often associate ourselves with bringing nothing to the table. However, we have so much to offer, but we just don't see it yet. Take this little tiny one-by-one Lego piece for a second. By itself, doesn't look very interesting, does it? But if you know anything about Lego, if you follow the instructions, you result with a beautiful model at the end, kind of like this one, which is one you can display in your room or in your house, just to show off. We are going to look at a time when the disciples initially doubted that Jesus would overcome an impossible feat of feeding the 5,000. We're going to be looking at John's account of this story in John 6, verses 1 through 15. As John writes, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he had already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for just each person to have one bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. And how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. That's not even including the women and children that were along with them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when they had had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And after the people saw this sign that Jesus had performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. We find this passage right after John 5, where Jesus speaks of his authority as the Son of God. Not to mention, earlier in that passage, he also heals a lame man on the Sabbath, which in that culture was a no-no. So he received a lot of criticism in that section from the religious leaders at that time. But we see some time has passed, and now he is crossing over the Sea of Galilee, finding himself surrounded by a massive crowd awaiting his arrival, as his fame has grown. Jesus knows these people need to be fed, and he plans to feed them. Yet he wants to test his disciples to see how they would react in this predicament. They, however, doubt that it's even possible to feed so many people with such little resources around them. Philip shares how even if they had the amount of money, it would take a whole half a year's wages to buy enough bread for just each person to have one bite. And then we have Andrew, who finds a young boy who has 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he says, "There's not enough here to feed everyone." These men believed that they couldn't do anything to help feed these people, but Jesus knew otherwise. He says, "Trust in me, I'll provide." He used these 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed a multitude of people. We and the disciples are like that little Lego piece that I talked about earlier. We may feel like we do not carry much weight in the kingdom of God. However, with Christ, he builds us up into a path that glorifies his kingdom, which calls for us to trust in him and his power to shape our lives into the images that bear him. I challenge us today to pray and ask God to use us to glorify his name, even when it means doing something that may make us feel uncomfortable. We may feel like we don't provide very much of anything to the kingdom of God, but that is where we are wrong. Remember, God created you with a purpose, and now we need to trust that he will fulfill his work in us. May God continue to bless you.